Moving on. According to estimates, India has already overtaken China as the most populous country in the world. You mustn't have heard much noise on this because this is not quite official. UN had said that India will become the world's most populous country sometime this year, sometime later in 2023. But after China reported in January that its population has shrunk for the first time in 60 years, some experts believe that India may have already become a home to more people than China. In January, China announced that their population shrank for the first time. It fell in 2022 to 1.411 billion, down some 850,000 people from the previous year. According to projections from the World Population Review, India's population is 141.7 crores at the end of 2022. That's a little more than 50 lakh that declared by China in January this year. India was expected to take over China only by 2027 by earlier estimates, late in 2023 then, but now it's safe to say that India has already overtaken China as the most populous country in the world. India's population was 1.21 billion in 2011 according to the last census, so we've added about 20 crore people in one decade. The 2021 census, mind you, hasn't taken place due to COVID-19. So India is now home to 1.4 billion people, as many as China, possibly more. If you would have noticed, when the Prime Minister spoke in Parliament last week, he said 140 crore Indians. So the big question is whether it is a challenge for India or it's an opportunity as the most populous country, and if there are challenges, can we meet them? But first, a little bit more on how China and India compare on population. And remember, with China's economy slowing down, India's growth numbers are looking good. The population decline is a big concern for the Red Dragon. So China's population has actually begun shrinking sooner than expected. India's population will continue to rise, continue to grow for the next 3 decades. China has an additional worry with an aging population. On the contrary, nearly half of Indians are under the age of 25 years. But India's population is also expected to shrink sooner than expected. So there's a very narrow window that experts say we have to exploit what is called the demographic dividend. Take a look at the trend of the population growth in India that it has taken over the last few decades. So the population growth in India has been slowing in recent decades from an annual growth of 2.5% during 1971-81 to an estimated 1.3% as of 2011-2016. TFR, which is the total fertility rate in India, has also been steadily declining. This number denotes the average number of children that would be born to a woman over her lifetime. The replacement level fertility is usually marked at 2.1. India is currently at 2.3 and has reached the current TFR at a relatively low per capita income when compared to the experience of major developed economies. In fact, TFR is now below replacement level in 13 out of the 22 major states. So India is entering a phase known as demographic dividend, where population rise is reducing and most people are in the working age. Given that, what are the challenges for India? The biggest challenge is producing enough good jobs for the unprecedented workforce. India has 900 million working age people. The number will reach 1 billion over the next decade. Only 40% to about 46% is employed or looking for jobs in India, according to some surveys. So there is a need to create 9 crore non-farm jobs by 2030, that is by the end of this decade. Remember, more than 45% of Indian workforce is still employed in the agricultural sector. The big question we're asking today, with India becoming the most populous country in the world now, can it reap the demographic dividend? A special guest is joining. Author of A New Idea of India and Managing Director of Navam Capital, Rajeev Mantri, is joining me to answer some of those questions. Rajeev, thanks a lot for your time. Are we truly ready for what we call the demographic dividend? We seem to have a lot of challenges, and the biggest of them is how are we going to employ the vast working age population of the country?
No, so it is a important milestone, but we should remember the historical context. So if we go back several centuries, it was always the case that India and China were the two largest by population, and it remains so. And on India's preparedness, I think we need to keep working on internal reforms. We need to keep creating opportunities for our population. I'm not of the school of thought that views population in and of itself as a bad thing.
Okay.
That there are people who think that having lots of people or a large population
Is
is
a
a bad thing for the country. I'm not of that school of thought. I believe that what India needs is a kind of an internal kind of economy and the systems and rules and laws which will enable our people to be able to realize their potential.
Yeah.
So we often find, actually, in the last 50 years, we've seen that lots of Indians have excelled when they leave the country.
Yes.
So thus we have a large diaspora today, probably millions of people across the Western world, as well as countries like Singapore. A very skilled sort of population from India, originating from India, is now working in these economies. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what does India need to do to sort of close that gap where people can kind of find similar work, achieve similar
success,
business aspirations, living here, working here.
Isn't creation of jobs, Rajeev, which has been at the center of the discussion and debate in India over the last decade or so, the biggest concern? Because we are not producing enough jobs, that much almost all of us can agree, certainly not enough as much as we need in non-agricultural sector going forward.
So most definitely. So actually, when we talk of Indian sort of immigrants, like Indians who are going abroad, there is also obviously a very large segment that is working in the Gulf countries. So besides like the skilled section, there is also a large section which is working in sectors like construction in the Gulf economies. So there too, obviously there are reasons why they're going there, probably for better pay and so on. But there's no doubt that India needs to do much more to increase the share of labor-intensive manufacturing. And to that end, whatever reforms are required, be it on the labor law side, be it in the area of land, I think our states and the union government should push those forward.
So according to you, as far as these important reforms that you mentioned are concerned, are we lagging behind them?
So at least, so if we take a factor market like land, for example, so that clearly, the union government is kind of handed it off to the states. And then different states have to take that up as regards land acquisition. And obviously, some states are doing more work on this than others. I mean, some states in East India have decided that they don't want anything to do with land acquisition. And thus, they're not seeing any kind of heavy industry or manufacturing industry come here. But by the same token, you are finding certain states are able to sort of help industries with land acquisition or provide land as required, and they are attracting investment. So if you look at the second piece, which is labor laws, now the parliament had passed the labor code bills. It has been probably 3 years now, or over 2 years.
Yeah.
And the states are yet to notify the implementation. So that is somewhere I think it should be done at the earliest, because that could be one of the bottlenecks that is preventing or rather holding back medium-sized companies from becoming very large-sized companies. In sectors like, let's say, textiles or shoe manufacturing or other kinds of labor-intensive kind of light manufacturers.
Yeah. As I mentioned, the window is actually pretty short for us. So if we have to reap these benefits, we have to start doing it now. In fact, yesterday. But let me come to the question of skill and education, which is also one of the big issues when it comes to India's large population. Many believe that with nearly half of the population under the age of 30 and 25, the biggest challenge is how are we going to educate them? What level of education, or the kind of education that they will get, and the right skills. Do you believe that we are behind in both of these parameters, imparting good education and proper skills to the workforce?
No, so skilling has always been a high priority, I would say, for all governments in the last 20 years. And even this government, so whether it's like, the skill development ministry, or even if you look at higher education, I think a lot has been done in the last like 5-7 years, whether it's like expanding the number of IITs, opening more medical colleges, more AIMS have come up all over the country. So a lot is being done to expand that supply. And obviously, many of these institutions are also being filled up with students.
Yeah.
That means, even the people are going for that kind of training. And when it comes to skill development, no doubt that much of this will happen as and when these particular industries take off, because probably the best learning comes when you are actually learning on the job. So those who are working on the assembly line at the iPhone manufacturing plants, for example, that have come up in the last 3 years, so they would actually get the best kind of training. And I don't know if something can be done to actually kind of complement that or replace that.
Okay.
So it really comes down to, in my view, creating the space for businesses to make those investments, set up the factories, and then of course we have a large labor pool, which is why so many global corporations want to come and set up shop in India.
Let me just broaden this instead of specifics, just as the larger picture, Rajeev. It's been widely believed that the next few decades are India's decades. You compare to what is happening in China, they've got an aging population, the economy is not growing as fast as India's. Overall, in the larger scheme of things, what do you see for India in the next few decades?
So one of the obvious kind of takeaways, if you look at the sort of demographic profile of various countries, not just China, but pretty much all over East Asia, all over Europe, there is a sort of clear tendency of the population going to age rapidly in the next 25 years. In fact, in countries like Japan, Korea, and China, there is going to be probably a degrowth, meaningful degrowth in the population. So, and then in a way, India is going to be counter-cyclical, where we will see our population continuing to grow steadily. So that itself gives us an edge. Along with that, I believe we have achieved successfully sort of implementing many important structural changes in the economy over the last 8-9 years. And we are continuing to work on that. We are essentially expanding our productive capacities. And along with the kind of demographic sort of plus point that we have compared to other large economies, I think that holds us in very good stead.
You're overall very optimistic that India can actually reap the benefits of a large working age population and market, and that we are on track. But I do want to end this conversation by finally asking you, what is it that you think India really, really needs to do, apart from some of the things you've mentioned, if we are to truly reap the demographic dividend?
So I think so there are two parts to it. One is on the internal reforms. We need to keep pushing the pedal on important reforms. We can see on the anvil things like the direct tax code. A new direct tax code is required now for the kind of economy that we have become. So just in the way we saw a significant reform of indirect taxes, we need a reform of direct taxes.
Okay.
I think that's a big one. Then the government has committed to a policy of privatization, which I think we need to see execution on. We need to see the government kind of step back from many of the industries where it is an active participant and leave space for private industry to step in, for the private sector to step in. Along with that, on the external side, I think India needs to keep pursuing free trade agreements and enter those kind of partnerships with friendly countries. We have already done that with countries like Australia, UAE. We are working on that with the UK.
Yes.
And more can be done with our allies and friends all over the world.
Okay. Well, we have seen how reforms have been a little bit tricky in India. Some have been rolled back, some have not really seen the light of day and failed to take off. We'll leave it at that. Rajeev Mantri, thanks a lot for joining us for our special discussion. On that note, I have to slip into a very short break. On the other side, we'll get you what is happening around the world, especially when it comes to UFO sightings in many countries. Stay tuned.